Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we'll take a look at the closing arguments in Trump's New York criminal trial. But first, some breaking news. A military aircraft went down in New Mexico this afternoon. Officials said the plane crashed just outside Albuquerque International Airport. The pilot is reportedly conscious and has been taken to the hospital. Crews are responding at the scene, and flights have resumed at the airport. After more than 4 weeks of testimony, the closing arguments prepare the jury for the historic task of deciding whether to convict a former president and presumptive Republican presidential nominee. The prosecution and the defense passionately advise the jury to make a wise decision. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more details.
On Tuesday, the prosecution and defense pushed their opposing theories one last time in the historic criminal case against former President Trump. Lead defense attorney Todd Blanche kicked off the morning with a 2.5-hour presentation designed to raise enough doubt in the jurors' minds to reject the prosecution's case. Blanche told the jury they were responsible for deciding whether or not former President Trump had anything to do with how payments to his former attorney were booked in his personal ledger, and that this case is not about an alleged affair, which Trump denies. At the outset, Blanche said President Trump is innocent. He did not commit any crimes, and the district attorney has not met their burden of proof, period. But discrediting Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen was the main focus of Blanche's remarks. For example, he called Cohen the MVP of liars. Trump's son, Donald Jr., who was in the courtroom, talked about Cohen at a press conference.
Michael Cohen is the embodiment of reasonable doubt, and this entire case hinges on someone who has quite literally lied to every single person and body he's ever been in front of.
Blanche said Cohen had lied in the past, and he lied to the jurors. He pointed to key testimonies, such as when Cohen said he spoke to Trump in October 2016 about paying off Stormy Daniels. Blanche said the call was actually to Trump's bodyguard. He told the jury they should want and expect more from this case than testimony from Michael Cohen, who is the only witness to say that Trump falsified business records. Moving on to Daniels' testimony, the defense disputed the former adult film star's allegations of an affair with Trump, and he rejected the prosecution's claims that entering into a non-disclosure agreement with Daniels to keep quiet about her story was illegal. Blanche dug into the details of several other claims made during the prosecution's case, including an alleged conspiracy and a campaign finance violation. The prosecution has the burden to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Lead prosecutor Joshua Steinglass had 4.5 hours to convince the jury to convict the former president. Steinglass, recognizing Cohen's credibility was a theme of Blanche's closing, admitted that the former attorney's past dishonesty was notable, but said Cohen's anger was understandable. Given that he was the only one to pay the price for his involvement in the conspiracy, said Steinglass. The prosecution painstakingly reiterated their weeks-long case, again presenting recordings, emails, and text messages to the jury. Steinglass said the defense's claims that Daniels was attempting to extort Trump is not a defense, and pointed to Daniels' testimony that she initially just wanted to get the story out, not intending to sell it to Trump. He said Daniels' story was the motive for Trump to buy her story and to ultimately commit crimes. Former President Trump faces 34 counts of falsifying business records and up to 4 years in prison or probation for first-time offenders. It's unclear whether or not the prosecution will request jail time if he is convicted. Arlene Richards reporting from the criminal courthouse in Manhattan.
As former President Trump's New York trial enters its final phase, President Biden's campaign makes its most direct attempt so far to wade into Trump's legal woes. Trump's team says that's prompted by Trump's lead in polls. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has the story.
And President Biden's campaign today made a rare move by holding a surprise press conference right outside of the Manhattan courthouse. And that's after the campaign had avoided directly talking about Trump's trial for the past weeks. Biden's surrogates Robert De Niro and 2 former Capitol Police officers focused on the message that Trump is a threat to democracy.
I don't mean to scare you. No, wait, maybe I do mean to scare you. If Trump returns to the White House, you can kiss these freedoms goodbye that we all take for granted. And elections, forget about it.
Democrats, you are gangsters. You are gangsters. You're salty. You're a nobody. Your movies suck.
The video of De Niro getting heckled by Trump supporters was posted by Trump on Truth Social as a response. Trump's team, in closing arguments today, argued that prosecutors are failing to prove their case and that key witness Michael Cohen is a liar. But prosecutors were still making their closing arguments and told jurors that they don't have to believe in Cohen to find that there is a conspiracy, adding that there is a mountain of evidence against Trump. Trump's campaign, meanwhile, again called this case a political one as Trump's son also weighed in. Watch.
Michael Cohen is the embodiment of reasonable doubt.
After months of saying the politics had nothing to do with this trial, they showed up and made a campaign event.
And President Biden's campaign, when asked about why they're holding a political event outside of a criminal trial, said they're here not because of the Trump trial, but because all the media outlets are here. Reporting from the White House, Iris Howe, NTD News.
And switching gears to Trump's classified documents case, federal judge Eileen Cannon today striking down a gag order request against the former president. She said prosecutors didn't follow proper procedure in filing the request. In a brief order, Cannon criticized prosecutors for not conferring with Trump's defense team about a possible gag order before making the request. But she added prosecutors can make the request again as long as they give the defendant enough time to read it. The former president's legal team said the request is aimed at censoring his speech while he's campaigning. Hunter Biden's federal gun charge is moving forward. An appeals court rejected his lawyer's motion to dismiss. The U.S. District Court judge hearing the case had earlier rejected the motion as well. The appeals court said it lacked jurisdiction because the district court hasn't finished hearing the case. Generally, a defendant can't appeal until after a lower court issues its ruling. Hunter Biden's trial is set for June 3rd. It's been 3 weeks since Israel started ground operations in eastern Rafah to battle Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. And according to reports, witnesses say Israeli tanks have now made their way to central Rafah. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest on the war.
Hamas terrorists released a video that claims to show an attack on Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip. This man, carrying what appears to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, makes his way to this opening where he spots an Israeli tank and fires on it. Hamas also released other videos showing terrorists taking cover under trees and firing mortars from various locations. And just the day before, Israel Defense Forces released their own video showing them blowing up a half-mile-long tunnel in the central Gaza Strip from which Hamas terrorists reportedly operated. And in the southern Gaza Strip, Israel's prime minister said that 1 million non-combatants have been evacuated from Rafah.
Help us, for God's sake. Dead bodies in the streets. No one has mercy on us or cares about us. Save us, for God's sake. Save the children. Save only the children, and not us save them.
The IDF began its ground operations in eastern Rafah about 3 weeks ago, trying to defeat what it says are the final battalions of Hamas terrorists. And according to Reuters, witnesses say Israeli tanks have now made their way to central Rafah. An Israeli government spokesperson gave an update on Tuesday.
Our war aims remain the same: to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, to free all 125 hostages, and ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel ever again. All objectives are within reach, and Israel will not compromise on any of them.
Also on Tuesday, Israel's prime minister visited troops in northern Israel, where he shared another of Israel's war objectives.
We are committed both on the civil and military levels to return the residents safely to their communities and homes. This commitment is one of the goals of the war. We are not giving it up.
Close to 100,000 Israelis have been displaced from northern Israel since the Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group began launching attacks into Israel shortly after the war between Israel and Hamas began on October 7th. Meanwhile, off the coast of the Gaza Strip, the Pentagon said the U.S. temporary pier for aid was damaged from rough seas. The Pentagon said the pier will be removed from the coast of Gaza for repairs. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Israel is investigating its recent strike on Hamas leaders in Rafah and the cause of a fire that killed several dozen civilians. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the State Department.
The U.S. is responding to that Israeli airstrike on a Hamas compound in Rafah on Sunday that led to civilian deaths. According to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, about 45 civilians died in the strike. It also killed the Hamas chief of staff in the West Bank and another senior member of Hamas. Department of State spokesman Matthew Miller said that the U.S. is awaiting Israel's full-scale investigation into the matter.
Israel has a right to go after the Hamas terrorists responsible for the cold-blooded murder of civilians, as appears to have been Israel's aim here, and Hamas should stop hiding behind civilians in Gaza. But Israel also has the obligation to do everything possible to minimize civilian harm as it carries out its operations. As soon as the United States saw reports of this incident, we reached out to the government of Israel to express our deep concern over what happened, ask for more information, and urge them to undertake a full investigation.
The Biden administration has threatened to withhold military shipments to Israel if Israel were to launch a full-scale military operation in Rafah, but Miller said that they had not yet crossed that line. The Israeli military claims it did not intend to cause the civilian casualties, and Israel has said that it used the smallest bomb available to them to make a targeted attack. Here's an Israeli military spokesman on this. Watch.
There are no tents in the immediate vicinity of the structure that we targeted. Contrary to reports, we conducted the strike outside the area that we designated as a humanitarian area and called civilians to evacuate to.
As Israel is investigating the matter, U.S. officials are talking to Israeli officials every day about carrying out these strikes while minimizing civilian harm. Back to you.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visiting 2 European countries today, securing over $1 billion worth of aid. This as tensions rise over the question of allowing Ukraine to use Western weapons to attack targets in Russia. Some fear this could lead to an escalation of the war. NTD's Virginia Gibson brings us this report.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visited Portugal and Belgium on Tuesday. He met with the Portuguese Prime Minister, who's pledging to send over $130 million in military and financial aid to Kyiv.
To date, we have delivered more than 1,000 tons of military material, including Leopard 2 combat tanks and unmanned aerial vehicle systems.
Belgium, meanwhile, promises to send around $1 billion worth of aid. That includes the delivery of 30 fighter jets. After signing the agreement on Tuesday, Zelenskyy visited a Belgian airbase. He was given a tour showcasing some F-16 fighter jets. Belgium hopes to deliver them before the end of this year. While in Brussels, Zelenskyy commented on Western countries that don't allow Ukraine to use their weapons on targets in Russia.
We can see the places of arms. Even from reconnaissance, you get maps, satellite images. You see where they stand, but you cannot respond. I think it's unfair. But we cannot, and this is a fact, risk the support of partners.
NATO's Secretary General on Tuesday dismissed concerns about Ukraine attacking targets inside Russia using Western weapons.
We have the right to support Ukraine without becoming a party to the conflict, because we are helping Ukraine to uphold the right for self-defense.
But Russian President Vladimir Putin shares a different view. He says NATO members are playing with fire. He told reporters that constant escalation can lead to serious consequences. Also on Tuesday, Poland's foreign minister was asked about sending troops to Ukraine. He says his country should not rule out that option, saying, quote, "Let Putin be guessing as to what we will do." He didn't specify what role the Polish troops would play. Ukraine's Western allies have generally not considered sending soldiers to the country, partly over fears of escalating the war. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Earlier, we spoke with A. Scott Bolden, former New York Assistant District Attorney, about Trump's New York criminal trial. A. Scott Bolden, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, closing arguments are today in Trump's Manhattan criminal trial. Jury deliberations could begin as early as tonight. Now, Judge Juan Merchan advised the attorneys, quote, "Please do not go into the law. Stay away from the law. Do not explain the law. That will be my job. I will take care of that." What's your reaction to this?
That's pretty fundamental in jury instructions and a directive from the judge. As you know, I'm a former state prosecutor from New York, from the DA's office in Manhattan, and so that's pretty fundamental. So I think he's absolutely right that both lawyers will want to get a little bit into the law because they want to attack the elements, but they need to attack the facts, not the elements of the law, because the elements of the law aren't changing. That'll be up to the judge to instruct the jury.
On that note, defense attorney Todd Blanche told the jury today that they should be skeptical, in part because of, quote, manipulation of evidence by prosecutors. Now, he also went after Michael Cohen, calling him a liar and a perjurer. In your view, did the defense do enough in closing arguments to leave a lasting impression on the jury?
I think they did enough with what they had to work with. This is a very tough case for them because Michael Cohen is a certified liar. He may be the most famous liar in the world right now based on this trial, but that's not going to change. But what it is going to change and what's going to move the jury is whether the prosecution can corroborate Cohen's testimony with documents and other witnesses. It's like putting together a map, if you will, or a puzzle. They're going to be putting pieces together to show that even if you discount Michael Cohen, if you don't believe him, there's enough here that corroborates his testimony that says that this was done, that the changing of documents and the forging of documents that make up the basis of these 34 felony crimes is enough to convict Donald Trump beyond a reasonable doubt. That's really the prosecution's job. The defense has to poke holes at that and say Michael Cohen is not credible. And if you don't believe Michael Cohen, then the rest of the case goes away. I disagree with that, but that's what they spent a lot of time on. And they did their job. Whether it's lasting is a whole nother story.
Zooming in on the crime within a crime nature of the felony, in your view, did the prosecution do enough to paint a clear picture for the jury?
I think they did. I think the defense didn't do enough on their direct case to argue or to provide facts or evidence that Donald Trump may have engaged in this to protect his wife. Why go through all these machinations with Pecker and with Stormy Daniels and with Michael Cohen and the lawyers for Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal? Why go through all of this? Just settling with her as a legal settlement in and of itself would not have been illegal. But if you did this because you wanted to avoid reporting it on your taxes or the Federal Election Commission, now you got a cover up, now you got a felony, now you got a crime, and now you got a problem with the jury.
Speaking of the jury has been gone for a week. They were non-sequestered, meaning they could have been exposed to other people's opinions and media reports over the long weekend. Now, how do you see jury deliberations going? Will it be a conviction, mistrial, hung jury?
You want me to be the great prognosticator now. I've never been good at that, having tried over 50 plus trials in that courtroom. But let me say this. They weren't sequestered, and everybody's got an opinion about Donald Trump. So the jury is going to be exposed to those pundits, if you will. If you tell them not to listen, they're going to listen. Let's just be very practical about it. You know, it's just like telling somebody not to do something. Your kids are going to go do it. And so you got to live with that. The reality is you got two lawyers on that jury. Those two lawyers are going to have a lot to say about it, whether they want to or not. I've sat on two juries, and the other jurors wanted me to be the foreman and what have you. I chose not to because I didn't want to have undue influence. But this is the case of the century and the first of its kind. And those lawyers are going to have a lot to do with connecting facts to the elements of the law and guiding that jury. The other thing you have a couple of engineers there who think in a very linear way. And they're probably all Democrats, who knows. And so the odds are that he's going to get convicted of some or all of these crimes. If not, I don't think he's going to be found not guilty. Short of that, you're looking at a hung jury because one or two just aren't convinced. And there's enough in evidence to to show where there could be reasonable doubt if the defense has done enough of convincing the jury of that.
Now going outside the courtroom, we saw President Biden's campaign today showed up with actor Robert De Niro and 2 former police officers. Reports say that was to refocus the presidential race back on January 6th and what happened that day. Now, this was seen by many as a reversal of the Biden campaign, given that they hadn't really touched this trial. What do you make of this?
Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, President Trump had the Republican leadership there a week ago, 2 weeks ago, because he's under a gag order, rightfully so. And so the Dems, without the president or the White House officially getting involved, these are Democratic supporters, Biden supporters, who say, we can do the same thing. I don't think much of it politically. I mean, you want to shape the story. Both sides can shape the story, but in the end, Robert De Niro, the former police officers, and from January 6th are not going to be in the jury room. And these jurors have a major task ahead of them. And most juries that I've seen over 36 years of practicing law take their job seriously. They're going to take the time to go through the evidence. They're going to articulate whether they've got reasonable doubt or not. And I think they're going to take a quick vote early to see where everyone is anonymously and then go from there. They'll break down more and more and more until they can get to a unanimous verdict. Or if they have a couple holdouts, then you're looking at them going to the judge and saying, we can't decide as one unit. The judge will send them back to do more work on it. And then they may come back once or twice. He may send them back once or twice. And then he's got a decision to make whether he's going to call a mistrial or a hung jury. And then we'll have to do it all over again at some point. That's just the criminal justice system.
Hey, Scott Bolden, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
For another perspective on the case, we'll hear from Andrew Cherkasky, former federal prosecutor and defense attorney. He wrote on X that Trump's team should be aiming for a full acquittal, and prosecutors failed to prove their case. Stay with us for that, coming up in the second half of the show. A surprising endorsement from former President Trump over the weekend. Meanwhile, President Biden keeps a distance from political candidates. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Former President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social on Tuesday lambasting House Freedom Caucus Chairman Congressman Bob Good and endorsing his GOP primary rival, John McGuire. Trump's social media post begins by stating in capital letters that Bob Good is bad for Virginia and bad for the U.S. The former president endorsed instead John McGuire, a Virginia state legislator and former Navy SEAL. Trump called him a true American hero. The endorsement comes as a surprise. 2 weeks ago, House Freedom Caucus Chairman Congressman Bob Good traveled to New York in support of former President Donald Trump, who's facing trial there.
This is a crooked sham trial to try to hurt the nominee who's going to be the president of the United States, whether or not they like it or whether or not they want that to happen. President Trump is going to be reelected.
Every House Freedom Caucus member who traveled with Chairman Good to New York in support of former President Donald Trump has received Trump's endorsement. Even Speaker of the House Mike Johnson received the former president's backing last Sunday. In a post in Truth Social, President Trump said he and Mike Johnson get along well and continue to work closely together. Former President Trump also said Mike Johnson has my complete and total endorsement. On the other hand, Democratic presidential candidate and current President Joe Biden has only endorsed 2 congressional hopefuls in the 2024 election cycle thus far, a stark contrast to the over 40 candidates Joe Biden endorsed in 2020, and of course in stark contrast of the over 90 candidates President Donald Trump has endorsed thus far in the election cycle 2024. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And joining me now to offer his thoughts on closing arguments in Trump's New York trial is Andrew Cherkasky, former federal prosecutor and defense attorney. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, to begin, what are your main takeaways from today's closing arguments in Trump's Manhattan criminal trial, especially how long the prosecution was?
Well, it's certainly very long closing arguments. That's not something that I think is a very good strategy for either side in this case. I think that there's actually a saying in the law that says that there are long closings and there are good closings, but there are rarely good long closings. That said, I think the defense did a good job out of the gate, coming hard, very hard at Michael Cohen, obviously very critical of him, but also getting to the main issues here. And the main issue, I think, is the idea that the business record entry of a legal expense for paying Michael Cohen in the way that he was paid was not improper and certainly not fraudulent or with an intent to defraud. That, I think, was the most important for the defense. The prosecution has gone in deep about the various ways in which the secondary, the additional crime in this case was proven, arguing vehemently that this was all about election fraud. This should have been handled through election campaign type resources, but I don't think that was proven through the case. So a dramatic day. The jury wants the case already. They're going to get it before about noon tomorrow.
I want to zoom in on the defense. As you mentioned, defense lawyer Todd Blanche went after Michael Cohen in his final summation, calling him a liar and a perjurer. Now, in your view, did Blanche do enough in his closing arguments to leave a lasting impression on the jury?
Oh, of course. I think that the best line of the day from him was calling him the gloat, the greatest liar of all time. That's something that sticks with the jury. It's something that they have to keep coming back to over and over again. I don't think anybody who watched this trial takes a lot from Michael Cohen unless it's corroborated independently through other evidence. And I think that that Todd Blanche did a very good job of explaining how little can be believed from Michael Cohen. But again, I think if you step back from the Michael Cohen drama or even the Stormy Daniels drama, this case isn't about them. It's not about the characters or about their credibility. It's really all about the actual business record entries. And I think that the defense did an okay job of hitting that point. I would have liked to see that even harder, because that's exactly what Donald Trump has been saying in the hallways outside of court every day, is he put this in his books in a proper fashion. He sent out a 1099. He disclosed this in White House ethics forms. And so even without getting into the credibility of Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels or all of the other cast of characters here, the defense made a very strong point from a business records or a document-based assessment of this case that the verdict should be not guilty.
Expanding on your point, zooming in on the crime within a crime nature of the felony charge, the prosecution today told the jury that the so-called hush money payment was all part of an effort to corrupt the 2016 election. This is after weeks of uncertainty about what that underlying crime was that would turn a misdemeanor into a felony. Now, did the prosecution do enough to paint a clear picture for the jury?
No, I don't think that they did. In fact, I think we've all been confused and continue to be confused on this. Now, Judge Merchan gave the prosecution a fabulous gift last week when he ruled in the creation of the jury instructions that the jury essentially doesn't have to be unanimous in what their theory is of this additional escalating offense here, and that it could have been illegal campaign I guess manipulation through various different ways, and that the jury could disagree on how it was done, but that if it was done generally, it was enough. So there's real issues with the constitutionality, the notice elements of what's required in a criminal case as we have here. That wouldn't be something that would be heard until appeal if Donald Trump is actually convicted. So the prosecution was given that gift. Now they go on for hours and hours and hours on that. And I think everybody in the courtroom, including the jury, must see that the idea that they're coming forward with some of these theories just now is quite shocking. It's quite surprising. And with two lawyers on that jury, I don't think they're going to like that much.
And now, noted legal scholar Jonathan Turley was writing on X that the prosecution is portraying Trump as not only a savvy businessman, but all-knowing and all-controlling, even in what his attorney said to a bank to set up an account. What do you make of his assessment here? Do you agree?
Well, there's been an effort by the defense to essentially distance Donald Trump from all of the activity that went on here, calling Michael Cohen basically the mastermind behind this hush money arrangement that occurred. I think that to some extent that's very true, that Michael Cohen was the leader of it. But I don't think that the evidence is very convincing that Donald Trump had no idea what was going on. He, in fact, posted a Twitter post a few years after all of this, kind of confessing or discussing the nature of what was going on, and that he thought it was appropriate under the circumstances. So I don't think that they need to go so far as to say that Donald Trump was completely unaware of what was happening, although they made those points at certain points throughout the closing. He could just be peripherally involved, not making decisions about putting these records into his books as business expenses and or as legal expenses, and just kind of trusting that his folks were doing it appropriately and following the law, as it were. He had an accountant on it. He had a lawyer on it. That should be enough to allow a regular business person to trust that what's being done is being done properly, even if he knows about it to some extent.
Now, on the political front, we saw the Biden campaign bring in actor Robert De Niro and 2 former police officers to talk about January 6th outside the courthouse. Now, Trump's sons also held a press conference in his defense. What do you make of the political scene outside the court?
I think Robert De Niro should stick to acting and probably not try to take up a career in news commentary. Very different forms of presentation to an audience, I suppose, because what he was spewing out there today made absolutely no sense. I thought he was incomprehensible. I don't know what point he was trying to make other than to effectively have a political interference with this trial, which is exactly what the Biden administration has blamed Donald Trump for doing for years now. And with all of these gag orders that they insist be placed on Donald Trump. Of course, we saw in Florida today, Judge Cannon wasn't about to allow a new gag order against Donald Trump. So just very curious that the Biden administration, who's been so quiet on this, would launch a political campaign effort outside the courtroom, essentially telling the jury to convict here. And so I just find it to be inappropriate. I think even Joe Biden's efforts and promise that he's going to make a White House speech after the verdict is quite troubling. He really should have stepped in a very long time ago, shut this all down, let America decide the next president based on politics, not based on lawfare.
Andrew Cherkasky, former federal prosecutor and defense attorney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Taiwan's new president is starting his term with his hands full. He met with a group of U.S. lawmakers over the weekend, and now tens of thousands are protesting. While he plans to continue his predecessor's policy seeking independence from China, the legislature is working to undermine his authority, leading to a public uproar. NTD's Taiwan correspondent Chi-Ling Cheng has more.
A chaotic start to William Lai's presidency in Taiwan. He was sworn in last Monday. People have been gathering outside Taiwan's parliament over the last week. On Tuesday, thousands of people are gathering once again. They are not protesting against Lai. Instead, they are taking a aim to the island's main opposition party that wants more power to scrutinize the new president. It highlights a major challenge Lai is facing. His party does not have a parliamentary majority. And here's the tricky part. Lai's ruling party strongly defends Taiwan's sovereignty, which angers China. Meanwhile, the opposition party is more friendly toward Beijing.
I was saddened by the bill's passage. I think they've been trampling on the Taiwanese people, our nation, and the homeland we strive to protect. Being too pro-China and trusting, as a result, good people were deceived by a predatory nation, and now they are so deeply brainwashed by the CCP that they can't go back. Hong Kong's example is already before us.
The look of my anti-tear gas respirator used during Hong Kong protests is not the future any of us want.
Some experts are concerned that the Chinese Communist Party will gain more influence on the island through the opposition party.
The blue and white legislative coup is a slow and long coup d'etat, a prolonged and continuous dismemberment of Taiwan's sovereign democratic system. It begins with a gradual erosion, leading to a complete takeover until the executive power is crippled and hollowed out, the judicial power is emasculated, and finally, parliamentary dictatorship is established. This is done in the name of public opinion, ultimately dismantling Taiwan's sovereign state system and voluntarily merging with China.
The blue and white parties refer to the island's opposition parties. They have been pushing the legislation. A series of protests against the measures erupted on one day after the island's new president took office and continued throughout last week. Hong Kong police just arrested 6 people over social media posts. One of the arrested includes an organizer of the city's Tiananmen Square massacre vigil. These are the first publicly known arrests that have occurred under the newest security law that was passed in March. Hong Kong authorities did not say what post content led to the arrests, but the social media page in question published posts marking the upcoming 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Hong Kong has commemorated the tragic event with yearly vigils for decades. The new security law introduced in March punishes treason and insurrection with up to life in prison. It comes 4 years after a similar law drastically lessened the city's freedoms. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Biden wants to power up the power grid. He's launching an initiative with 21 states, all of which have Democratic governors.
President Biden is launching an initiative to bolster America's power grid through implementing new technologies, building transmission lines, and using more renewables. Energy demand is projected to surge. Biden's plan is to meet this surging demand while keeping energy affordable.
It is in favor and has provisions in it that favor wind and solar installations as opposed to fossil or potentially nuclear installations.
Michael Reed is a policy analyst at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He calls Biden's plan the Green New Deal 2.0. In terms of function and implementation, he says there's little difference.
The goal is eventually to have as green or non-carbon emissions as possible from the power generating sector. That will directly lead to very, very unstable grid and very, very high prices.
This comes on the same day hundreds of thousands lost power in Texas because of weather. Texas is, however, not working with Biden on his initiative. Biden is partnering with 21 states, all of which have Democratic governors.
It socializes the cost of transmission, meaning that it generally requires, while it doesn't say so, that the cost of new transmission needs to be paid for by all consumers, rather than the generation that is causing the transmission.
Analyst Michael Reed says the red states have ideological differences with Biden, and that Biden wants the cost of new transmission to be socialized. That is, for everyone to pay instead of just those who actually use the energy.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin over at the Sports Hub. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in baseball, where longtime umpire Angel Hernandez announced his retirement. Now, most umpires are relatively unknown. Why has his retirement made headlines?
Well, he was previously in the news for unsuccessfully suing Major League Baseball for racial discrimination. Now, this is back in 2017. He had been passed over for a crew chief, plus he hadn't worked a World Series since 2005. Now, he's also had his shares of run-ins with players and managers, which every umpire has. I mean, there was Kyle Schwarber's very famous rant after being rung up on strikes by Hernandez just a couple years ago. Schwarber clearly disagreed with the calls. There's also the time he was blasted by Yankees pitcher CC Sabathia in the 2018 Division Series after 3 different calls he made at first base were all overturned via instant replay. This is over just a 4-inning span. Now, in any case, Hernandez started umpiring all the way back in 1991. He said he's retiring now to spend more time with his family.
Moving to tennis news, a player at the French Open apologized on Instagram Tuesday for accidentally hitting a spectator with a ball. Now, he was given a warning for unsportsmanlike conduct, but could he have received a stricter penalty?
Yeah, in some cases, it results in disqualification for the player, even though it's, accidental or unintentional. Now, we're not talking about a live ball that's being hit between the players. This happened in between points. He just hit the ball and it happened to go into the crowd. Now, there was, they actually stopped play for 15 minutes to discuss what to do. He avoided disqualification because the spectator was fine. But this sparked debate, though. Last year, they actually disqualified a doubles player after she accidentally hit a ball girl in the neck with the ball. Even at the U.S. Open a couple years ago, Novak Djokovic hit a line judge in the neck with a ball. They disqualified him. He was ranked number 1 at the time. So they're very serious about this. A gentleman's sport, for sure.
Well, shifting gears to the NBA, we have Game 4 tonight between the Mavericks and Timberwolves, with Dallas up 3-0. What does Minnesota need to do to get a win?
Well, for one thing, they got to get Karl Anthony Towns going. He's just 3 for 22 from shooting from three-point range in this series. That's 13%. That is well below his career average of 40%. He is one of the best three-point shooting big men in the game. Now, he's not the only one not having a great series. Anthony Edwards as well. He's shooting just 38% from the floor overall in the series. He is averaging 22 points a game. But Minnesota, I mean, they're down 3-0. No team has ever come back from a deficit like that. Now, I will grant they could very well be up 3-0. Every game has been so close, but Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic for Dallas have been so good in the final minutes. They've stolen all 3 games. Now, let's take a look at the NBA playoff brackets here. The Celtics won last night to complete their sweep of the Pacers. They are into the finals. The Mavericks, as we just talked about, one more win and they complete. They eliminate Minnesota, and we would have Dallas versus Boston in the NBA Finals if the Mavs win any of the next 4 games.
Looking at the NHL playoffs, we also have Game 4 tonight between the Panthers and Rangers. New York has a 2-1 lead after dropping the opener. How have they regained control here?
Well, 2 straight overtime wins. I mean, this is a very close series. Now, one unsung player has emerged in this series. This is Rangers center Barclay Goodrow. He had just 4 goals in the regular season. That's over 80 games. In this postseason, he already has 6, including 3 in the last 2 games. I mean, this guy's like Claude Lemieux here. But his Game 2 winner in overtime was huge because the Rangers just lost Game 1 at home. If you lose the first 2 at home, very difficult to come back from that. But they won in overtime. They then won Game 3 in overtime to take a 2-1 lead in that series. Let's take a look at where the NHL playoff brackets are at. The Stars came back to beat the Oilers last night in Game 3, and then they'll have a 2-1 series. As we were just talking about, the Rangers are up 2-1 over the Panthers. Game 4 will be tonight in Florida. The winners of these 2 series will meet for the Stanley Cup title.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.